Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the biological and psychological mechanics of an invisible antagonist that every single one of us faces daily. Yep, we're talking about stress. Now, we throw the word stress around casually all the time, right? But the reality is, it's not just a feeling. It's a profound, highly measurable, and systemic physical reaction. By the end of our time together today, you're going to understand exactly how it works, the real damage it does to us, and most importantly, what science says we can actually do about it. So let's kick things off by asking a pretty fundamental question. What is actually happening under your skin when the pressure mounts? We really need to shift our thinking from stress as a vague, fleeting emotion to a concrete biological reality. Because here's the crazy part. When your brain perceives a threat, whether that's a literal predator chasing you or just an impending deadline at work, your body literally does not know the difference. It launches the exact same coordinated, hardwired defense mechanism. To completely demystify this, here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll cover the physiology of stress. Second, the actual causes. Third, its effects on health. Fourth, how we measure it. And finally, managing stress. All right, section 1, the physiology of stress and our body's biological response. Okay, let's travel back to 1936. A researcher named Hans Selye was observing lab rats, and he noticed something really profound. Regardless of what he subjected these poor rats to, extreme cold, intense fatigue, toxins, their bodies reacted in the exact same way. He called this the general adaptation syndrome. And this concept is absolutely foundational because it proves that stress isn't just all in your head. It's a non-specific bodily response to any demand. It's literally an evolutionary survival mechanism. When we map this syndrome out visually, we see a very distinct curve. It kicks off with a steep spike upward as you initially react to a threat. Then it plateaus out into this thick block of resistance where you're actively fighting off the stressor. But notice what happens over on the right side. The line just dramatically crashes down into a state of total depletion. So, this biological journey happens in 3 distinct steps. Step 1 is the alarm reaction. This is your classic fight or flight. Your body gets flooded with adrenaline for a quick burst of energy and cortisol, the primary stress hormone. Your heart is pounding. Then, step 2 is resistance. The initial shock passes, but if the stressor sticks around, your body just stays on this simmering high alert. Your blood pressure stays elevated, and you might feel super irritable. Then comes step 3, which is definitely the most dangerous, exhaustion. If that resistance stage drags on for too long, your physical and mental resources are just completely drained. This is where burnout, chronic fatigue, and serious illnesses really start to set in. Moving on to section 2, causes of stress. What actually triggers the alarm? Researchers Holmes and Rahe created this really fascinating social readjustment rating scale. The goal was to mathematically calculate our stress load using what they called life change units. Now, obviously, we all know the death of a spouse is utterly tragic and it earns the top score of 100. But look at this. Marriage is a 50 and pregnancy is a 40. The huge takeaway here is that any major life transition, even incredibly positive, joyful ones, requires intense mental energy. It forces your body to adapt and therefore directly adds to your physiological stress load. But it's not just external events out in the world. It's also about how we are personally wired. Friedman and Rosamond conducted a massive longitudinal study and identified 2 main personality types. Type A individuals are highly competitive, they constantly feel a sense of time urgency, and they are prone to hostility. Type B individuals, on the other hand, are much more relaxed, patient, and easygoing. What they found was that Type A folks, especially the ones prone to hostility, are driven by internal pressures that basically keep them stuck in those alarm and resistance phases we just talked about. And that puts them at double the risk for heart disease. Double. Furthermore, we absolutely have to talk about our jobs. A massive study following over 10,000 civil servants in London found that work stress is deeply, deeply dangerous. Crucially, the researchers concluded that approximately 32% of the effective work stress on fatal conditions, like coronary heart disease, can actually be explained by secondary bad habits, meaning work stress makes us eat poorly, drink more, and exercise way less. The stress essentially triggers a massive domino effect of unhealthy behaviors. Which brings us to section 3, effects on health. And that systemic physical impact. Make no mistake, Chronic stress is absolutely merciless. It doesn't just give you a tension headache and leave you alone. When you're stuck in Cellier's resistant stage, prolonged exposure to cortisol launches a full-body assault. It drives up your cholesterol and blood pressure, drastically increasing heart attack risks. It attacks your gut, destroying nutrient absorption and causing bloating. It even goes so far as to suppress your immune system, making you highly susceptible to infections and slowing down tissue repair. It is a total system compromise. Section 4. Measuring stress. How do we track the invisible?
Because stress operates so stealthily inside us, psychology relies on incredibly precise biological tools to get objective data. On the high-tech end, an fMRI scanner tracks changes in the flow of oxygenated blood in the brain. It literally lights up to show exactly which neural networks are firing. Meanwhile, a much simpler tool, like a pulse oximeter, just clips right onto the finger to measure heart rate and oxygen saturation. This gives us real-time data on the body's physiological arousal, no blood draw required.
To see this in action, look at this 2005 study by Wang and colleagues. They put participants in an fMRI and made them count backward from 1,000 by 13s, while prompting them to speed up, which, let's be honest, is basically everyone's worst nightmare. The upward trend line here proves that as participants reported higher feelings of stress, the blood flow in the right prefrontal cortex, which is a part of the brain linked to negative emotions and vigilance, spiked in direct correlation. Stress is not an abstract feeling. It literally changes the blood flow in your brain. All right, Section 5. Let's talk about some good news: managing stress, prevention, and solutions. First, let's look at biological interventions through the sheer power of biofeedback. In this 1969 study by Budzynski, participants were hooked up to machines that played an audio tone whenever their forehead muscles were tense. The solid line you see at the bottom represents the group receiving that feedback. By simply hearing a biological signal of their own tension, they were able to consciously drop their muscle tension significantly over the sessions, far better than the control groups who just sat in silence or heard irrelevant noise. It proves that we can actively train our bodies to stand down from that alarm phase. Now, on the psychological side, let's move to a powerful cognitive behavioral tool called stress inoculation training, or SIT, designed by Meichenbaum. Think of it like a literal vaccine for your mind. It empowers you through 3 specific phases. Phase 1 is conceptualization. You sit down and logically break apart your stressors, isolating what you can actually change and accepting what you can't. Phase 2 is skills acquisition. You learn concrete tools, deep breathing, mindfulness, problem solving. And then Phase 3 is application. You don't just sit in a room and talk about it. You go out and practice these new skills in increasingly stressful real-world situations, building up an undeniable tolerance to pressure. So, we've covered a lot of ground today. The biology of the general adaptation syndrome, the surprisingly normal life events that trigger it, the massive toll it takes on our vital organs, and the concrete, scientific ways we can measure and manage it. Since we now know beyond a shadow of a doubt that stress is a very real, measurable physical phenomenon, I want to leave you with this final thought. Knowing all of this, how will you consciously choose to step out of the exhaustion stage and regain control of your biology tomorrow?